7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Hello, everybody. This is Danny Lambert with Plush Republic. This is the second part of the Amplitude implementation series, which is how to implement the server-side tracking code to send events from your server to Amplitude. The big difference between what I typically will do in structure for what events to send server-side versus client-side is anything that is extremely critical and couldn't be corrupted by things like ad blockers, such as new user registrations, orders, logins. Typically, you want to create a hybrid where those events are sent from the server and page level, and less critical events are sent from the client side. That's not a strict rule. You don't have to set it up that way. Some people advise against it. That's just my personal preference. So you could get away with just having client-side tracking, especially depends on what your needs are. So make sure you know what your tracking plan is to determine whether this is even important for you. But for the sake of covering everything, here's how you would implement Amplitude server-side. So you go to Manage Data. You should already have your project created from the client-side tracking video, which I do have here. These are old events, so let me just go ahead and delete these real quick so I can show you a clean slate. And then from this point, what we had done before was go to data source, and then we added a data source, which is this one. I'm going to show you how to set up server-side using NPM. So in this case, when you do HTTP, it shows you like all the various ways that you could do it using curl, but for the full documentation, you can click through here and you can find which particular library you're looking for. So in this case, I'd be looking for Node.js, and they have all the information on it here. I didn't prefer to use this as much as I did from this documentation on NPM, so I just searched for Amplitude NPM, and then you click here, and that will get you here, which is just a much more brief explanation of how you would implement it. So the first step is to install the package. So if you go to your terminal, I'm not going to do it because I have already done it, but what you would do is just go to the directory that your application is in and just run npm install amplitude save. After you run that, that should be added to your package.json. So if I open it up, I should see Amplitude in here. So I know that npm ran properly and that that's installed. The next step it tells you to do is just the basic initialization, and this is all that is required. So for this particular example, I'm going to go to my index route, which just calls whenever I go to the home page, and I just set up variable amplitude equals require amplitude, and then you have to do the variable with your API token. So I just copy and paste this and then put it into my code. Where you get your API token from is you go back to your project settings, and your API key is right here. So you'll copy that, you'll drop it in here, and you'll hit save. Then as far as tracking an event, it has that code for you here. There's so much more taxonomy around like what you should send, how you should send it, depending on what information you want to relay. But this is just like the basic template. So what I did, I just copy and pasted that into my route call, so I can just show you an example of how you would send it. And I took out all the things that were optional. So initially it looked something like this. And I wasn't going to send any user properties. We'll get into this when we talk about tracking users. I wasn't going to send any additional event properties, so I just took that out. And then here you need to send an event type, and the only other required piece of information, we'll get into like session, device ID, user ID later, is you either need to have a user ID or a device ID. You don't need both. As it says here, only required if device ID is not passed. In the future, we'll be setting this user ID based on the ID that's generated when they create a user or log in. But for now, just to show you that this is working, we would send the event type and the user ID. So it's showing you how I got from that initial code block to what we have here, which is just send data with event type server event. I'll do server event test, and I put in a pseudo user ID, right? This would actually be either an email address or a user ID that your system generates. But for here, I just put 123, and then it calls amplitude.track data. So you'd hit save with that. Just to go back, that covers installing the package via npm, setting up the initialization with the variables, and then just tracking a basic event. So because that's set on my index route, as soon as I launch this application and I visit the home page, that event should be fired. Obviously, that's not an event that I actually want. This would be something that I would send like login in my login route or register event when in a register route. But this is just to show you that the server-side installation is actually working. So I'll call node app.js. My server is running. Here is my home page, so I called that. And now when I come into events, I see that server event test, right? I just changed that to server event test. So you can see that Amplitude is now installed using npm, just setting up that API key and setting that basic event. In future videos, we're going to talk about what events to send, both for like general events and for user events like login or registration, along with like the user properties, how to send all that information in a way that makes sense to Amplitude, and then start working on how you can analyze that, which is like the overarching goal of Amplitude. So hopefully this video gave you a good understanding of how to actually implement it server side. You already have the video that shows you how to implement it client side. And the next video, I'm going to start showing you what events to send and how you can structure them. And then from there, we can start using some of the analysis tools that they provide out of the box. So hopefully this video was helpful. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. Leave some comments on other content you'd like to see me create. And stay tuned for the rest of the course.
Oh,
Thank you.
this you crazy mother.